And welcome once again to the Democrats of Greater Tucson. We have a wonderful speaker. Benny White is perhaps best known to us for pushing back on election deniers. He is an elections expert with many years of in-depth, firsthand experience designing and implementing election systems with the Pima County Election Integrity Commission, the Pima County Election Accuracy and Certification Board, and the Arizona Election Procedures Manual Revision Committee. Benny, we had a spot on the John C. Scott show the other day, and I mentioned you were going to be our speaker. If John isn't the captain of your cheerleading squad, he should be. He just thinks the world of you. And
yeah, we've been friends a long time.
And it was really nice to hear that. So let's give Benny White a real warm Democrats of Greater Tucson welcome. Here we go.
All right.
Here's
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you folks. This is one of a series of events that I've been involved in, talking to people around the state and actually nationally with the media, and appreciate the opportunity to try to provide you with some information that might be helpful in dissuading or changing some minds about some of these conspiracy theories that we keep hearing about elections and election fraud and what may or may not have happened in the elections in Arizona. So with that, I'll proceed, I guess. A little bit of background. I've worked in election stuff since about 2008. I was on the Election Integrity Commission here in Pima County for a number of years and have worked with the secretaries of state on revision of the Elections Procedures Manual. And since 2020, it seems like my life has been pretty much completely and continually involved in looking at elections in Arizona and what may or may not have happened. So I've tried to document all that stuff, and hopefully today I can give you some information. I'm going to share screen on a PowerPoint slide that I have. And I'm going to try to keep this non-political. I know everybody here is very politically oriented, but I've always approached election administration and getting the results out as really a citizen activity, not a partisan activity. And I'd like to keep it in that view today. Also, hopefully will engender a few questions. I'd like to put those in the chat, if you will. I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, trying to keep it up at the 30,000 foot level. But I would like to have the opportunity to run through those questions in chat and maybe address each one of them specifically before we get through. So with that, I'm going to try to get this PowerPoint slide up to watch it. I have worked with a couple of other guys. We call ourselves the audit guys, and we took on that nomenclature in response to the fiasco that was going on up in Maricopa County following the 2020 election. That was a real floor show, attempting to get a different result for Donald Trump. And we put Senator Fan and everybody on notice right out the outset of that we were going to hold everyone accountable and make sure that they did things properly and legally and didn't try to make up the numbers as they went through. Unfortunately, we were not successful in that. They did make up the numbers as they went through, but we were able to show that nothing that they reported had any level of accuracy about it and was a complete farce. I publish all of our work on our website at realaudits.org, and I'm going to walk through a spreadsheet that I've generated after the 22 election for Maricopa County, and that's going to be what we talk about today. But I would encourage everybody to go to that realaudits.org website, download the materials and look at it in detail. I leave all the formulas telling you where I added and subtracted and multiplied and divided so that you can see my work. And hopefully that gives it some trustworthiness. So with that, let's get on with the show here. These are the high level topics that I'm going to talk about a little bit. Again, this is a review of the 22 general election. And I use public records. I use the voter registration system, the canvas reports, and the cast vote record that's generated by the election management system. In my past history, I was the representative for the state and local Republican Party, so I had access to registration information and election information. Recently, since I changed registration to independent, I now have to buy all of that, and that gets to be a fairly expensive operation, but I think it's important and a good use of the funds that I have available. From the voter registration, I get voter history, how many voters we actually have in all the precincts. I look at the canvas and I look at the total ballots and votes, voting methods, what the results were in the contests, and then what the turnout was to see if there were any ballots added or maybe ballots lost. Those kinds of things come out of that canvas report. And then the real heart of the work is out of the cast vote record. I know Tom Ryan is, I think, still a very active Democrat participant. And Tom has been looking at the cast vote records in Pima County, at least, for a number of years. The Pima County record is not quite as extensive as the Maricopa County record, different election management systems. The Pima County system is an ES&S product. And in Maricopa County, they use Dominion system, which has extensive information available. And what the cast vote record is, it's an electronic record of every ballot that's counted, every vote mark that's on there, and the density of the mark in that vote mark. So you can tell exactly who got votes and who didn't get votes. And then through data analysis, take a look at what that means to determine how the voters actually behaved. And then finally, the thrust of what we've done now in 2022 versus what we did in 2020 is taking another look at disaffected voters and then the effect of crossover voting as it impacted the results in the race. Quick look at voter registration. Again, this is Maricopa County. One other word on Pima County. I'd like to do this same analysis on Pima County, but I don't have access to the cast vote record because they don't consider that to be a public record, and I don't want to go to court, spend money to get that particular record from them. But here's just a trend of how the voter registration is changing over the months, October, November, December. If you will remember in the 2020 election specifically, there was a lot of argument about how many voters there were. And the problem with what was presented in a lot of the lawsuits and a lot of the public social media postings was that the people making those posts didn't understand that voter registration is very dynamic. It changes all the time on a daily basis. And it's reported in Maricopa County on a monthly basis. The rest of the state reports on a quarterly basis, but it changes. The people involved, the level of party registration involved, how many people are active, how many people have been deactivated for whatever reason, how many people got restored, et cetera. And so that's just one of the things that I look at as I go through that. And it's foundational to all of the other analysis. If you don't know how many voters you have, you don't really have a clue as to how many ballots you should or should not have. So I looked at the 22 race again. I looked at the VM55 voted file. That's unique to Maricopa County. In this state, they put that out at the same time they put the canvas out, and it's a record of everyone who participated in the election by mailing back a mail ballot, going to an early voting site, or casting a vote at the polling places on election day, either as a provisional ballot or a regular ballot. And that shows that there were 1,562,758 total ballots cast. And we had, if you look at the VM55 file, there's a slightly greater number of people involved in that total there than there are ballots cast and reported into the canvas. A part of that is these 2,649 people that are confidential voters. They don't show up in the big VM55 file. And like the voter registration files, that is a snapshot that is generated at the canvass time. It does not capture people that voted very early and then since changed their voter registration or moved or died. And that is an ongoing situation that we have people changing voter registrations all the time. So it's just a snapshot. It gives you an idea of where people were, how they voted, whether they voted early at mail, whether they voted at an early voting site, or whether they went to the polls. There were 2,991 in this larger total over here that were voted a provisional ballot that was not counted for some reason. They were not registered to vote, or they didn't submit adequate information, whatever. I think that's all I want to talk about on that particular slide. And here's the canvas of the election. It was a breakout of this is just a breakout of the governor and the attorney general's race. One thing I would like for you to notice there is the undervote numbers in the governor race. It was 11,766. And the undervote in the attorney general race was 50,246. A lot of reasons people undervote an election. They don't know the candidate, they don't know what that office does, or they just don't like either or both of the candidates involved. And so I looked at all of the 50,246 ballots that had undervotes on them, and there was not any sign of a mark on any of those ballots in that race. So when Abraham Hamadeh says there's no possibility that there could be 50,246 undervotes in Maricopa County in his race, he's mistaken, and he hasn't looked at the records. All right, getting a little bit more into the cast vote record here. There's a lot of controversy about what happens in the review process, whether there's a modification to the results as a result of the adjudication, and then how many ballots were there that there was no change in things. Typically, adjudication occurs because there's a write-in involved. People write in Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, their sister's name, whatever, and the write-in is an entertainment event, I guess. But that causes the ballot to be adjudicated electronically in Maricopa County. Ambiguous there means that there's a mark in that oval, but it's not big enough to be counted directly as a vote. And the ranges on that are between 14% and 35% of the pixels in the oval being filled in. And that typically involves a check mark or an X, or sometimes just a pen rest where somebody put their pen down there for a minute, but didn't really mean to make a mark in that particular ballot. So that causes it to be done. If the ballot is blank, that's looked at. If there's an undervote, there wasn't any vote marks in there, that's also looked back at to see if we can find, are the people circling the party, or are they circling the candidate outside of the vote mark area, but they really did intended to vote in that area. Also, overvotes are looked at. If there's more marks in a race than can be accommodated by the vote for example, vote for one, if there's 2 marks there, that becomes an overvote, and that gets evaluated by the adjudication board. And also if the whole contest is blank. Now, there's a difference in Maricopa County and the rest of the state, including Pima County, and that Pima County and the ES&S operators in the other counties have the capability of doing electronic adjudication. But here in Pima County, the decision has been made not to do that, with the exception of evaluating the write-ins. If there's a write-in in there, they look at that image of that ballot and decide whether or not it's a qualified write-in or not. If it is a qualified write-in, they receive a vote in the final results, but if it's not, it just goes away. And that really accelerates the after election reporting, because you don't have to take all those ballots out of the stack and separately evaluate them. You can do it electronically. They stay in the storage with the other ballots, and the inventory is not messed up. So Over on the left-hand side, you can see there were 221,000 ballots that were looked at in Maricopa County. 135,000 of those had something on it, someplace on one of the races of the 80 or so races that are on each of the ballots was modified. Typically, that's a write-in was discounted because it was unqualified. And then there were 85,000 that weren't changed in any way. When we look at the ballots reviewed in the governor's contest, there's always a controversy about a bias. Which way did the electronic adjudicators go? Did they favor the Republican or the Democrat? And it typically turns out that it's pretty well balanced. The bottom table here shows you that for the ballots that were viewed, the 18,000 ballots that were viewed that had something involving the governor's race on it, Gary Lake picked up 587 additional votes that she wouldn't have had. Katie Hobbs picked up 897 that she wouldn't have had. There were some qualified write-ins that got some votes. There were a whole lot of people that wrote something in and marked that oval, but they weren't qualified. And then there were overvotes and undervotes as well in that race, 11,766 undervotes, which you've seen before. And then down in the Attorney General race, we see again, Hamadeh picked up 512 ballots, or votes rather. Chris Mays picked up 733. So there's a little difference here favoring the Democrat candidates in these races, but it's not extraordinary. And there were, again, a huge number of undervotes in the Hamadeh Mays race. I also looked at Secretary of State contest. I looked at the 5 top level contests, and all of that is in the spreadsheet that you can download. But just looking at the Secretary of State race with Mark Fincham and Adrian Fontes, the resolution there is just about the same differential as we saw in the other races, with the Democrat candidate Adrian Fontes getting a few more extra votes than Mark Fincham did. The undervote there was pretty large also. In the early ballots, there was 36,000 undervotes in that race as well. So again, people either didn't know who that person was or didn't know what that was about or didn't like them. Okay, let's talk about disaffected voter effect just a little bit. And what we've done in our analysis is we look at how many races went out all over the state that people had an option to vote for. And is there, in the Republican side of the ballot, there were 16 possible races that people could have voted for. And there were 13 possible races on the Democratic side. There were some legislative district races that didn't have a Democrat candidate in Maricopa County. So that's why that difference. And then we said, well, we want to know who votes for these party candidates. And we said, well, if they vote for 8 of 16 Republicans on the ballot, they're probably Republican supportive voters. And if they didn't vote for the candidate that we're looking at, in the left-hand table, you can see we're talking about the Senate race. Well, then we called them disaffected. There's a lot more people that didn't vote for Masters than it's on here. We just captured the top 18, the people that voted for at least 8 or more, or in the case of the Democrats, at least 7 or more. What this shows you is that there were 52,611 people that voted for 8 or more Republicans, but didn't vote for Blake Masters. We look at both sides and attempting to be a little bit unbiased or fair. And in the Democrat race, there were 2,673 people that didn't vote for Mark Kelly, but voted for the majority of Democrats on the ballot. So again, a huge difference there. There's a 50,000 vote differential right off the bat in the U.S. Senate race. In the governor race, that same disproportionate balance shows up for Lake versus Hobbs. Over to the Secretary of State race, it's huge. It's 73,000 people were disaffected in the on the Republican side, but only 7,000 for the Adrian Fontes side. We'll talk about crossover voters just a little bit later, but again, that's the Attorney General and the Treasurer's race. As you go down, you can see that Kimberly Yee was not Trump endorsed, did not talk about Trump during her campaign. She was an incumbent. People knew her name. They didn't necessarily know Mr. Quezada's name. And so there wasn't a whole lot of disaffected voters for Kimberly Yee, but there were for Mr. Quezada, probably because they just didn't know who he was. So I further break that down in the spreadsheet. We look at, these are voting patterns. How many people voted for 0 Democrats, but did not vote for Katie Hobbs? That was 64,473. Those are pretty much pure Republican ballots. If we look down at the other end of it, we say, well, how many people voted for 12 Democrats, but didn't vote for Katie Hobbs? There's only 558 of those. So as you get higher and higher percentage of the Democrats being voted for, you can see that the votes for the candidate that we're looking for continually drop off toward the end of the range. But in total, there were 10,981 voters that did not vote for Katie Hobbs on the Democrat percentages of 7 out of 13. On the Kari Lake side, there's a huge difference there of 40,690 disaffected voters did not vote for Kari Lake. Now the crossover. The crossover disaffected numbers are right here at the bottom of the thing, but these are people that, on the left-hand chart there is the Democrat side of the calculations. These are people that voted for Democrats, didn't vote for Katie Hobbs, but they voted for Kari Lake. And that total then winds up being down here at the bottom, 8,541. So those are crossover votes. Those are people that are generally supportive of Democratic candidates, did not vote for the Democrat candidate for governor, and voted for the opposite party candidate. And that was new analysis between this election and the other election. In 2020, we only had Joe Biden and Donald Trump to work with. Here we wanted to really capture, if we could, the effect of the Trump endorsement. Did it work? Did it not work? Did it hurt the candidate involved? And it appears to us that it hurt the candidate involved, didn't help them at all. And again, on the Kari Lake side, on the Republican supportive side, we see that we had 26,898 people that are generally supportive of Republicans, but wound up voting for Katie Hobbs. Okay, this is the final, just kind of fun slide. When you read the media, you get the idea that people always vote either fully Democratic or fully Republican. All these little cubes down here on the bottom right-hand side of the slide shows you how people mix and match. On the left margin of the chart here, these are pure Republicans, pure Democrats. These are also pretty much pure Republicans or Democrats. All this stuff down in the bottom right-hand corner are mixtures. I vote for some Republicans, some Democrats, up and down the ballot. Or I don't vote for all the people on the ballot. But this is where you win or lose elections, down here in this mix and match. You have to go to the middle of the political spectrum in order to get support for your campaign.
Okay, Susie, you have a question for Benny.
I do. I know you looked at you showed us all of the people who are Democrats who won and the Republicans who lost. What about the superintendent of education? How did the spread go for Tom Horn? And sorry.
Let me see what I have on that. I didn't spend a lot of time on that because it was a very close race. Generally speaking, Mr. Horn was not involved in a a Trump endorsement situation. And so that really was outside of our area of interest. I have done some of that analysis, but I don't have it readily available to me. I'm sorry.
Lori, you have a question.
I know that on some states used to have, and maybe some still do have, a straight ticket choice on their ballots. So that would get rid of a lot of the undervoting. Do you know if Arizona ever had a straight ticket choice on the ballot? And if they did,
Yeah, they started out with a straight ticket. I don't know when they abandoned that. One of the early court cases involved a straight ticket dispute. There was a real controversy about who was going to be elected to governor. And that was based on where was the mark placed. And that was resolved after the governor had actually taken office, and they turned it around. That was back in 1918, I believe. And I'm sorry, I don't know when we switched to a individual candidate election.
do you know of other states that have a straight ticket?
Oh, sure. There's lots of states that use, they haven't quite transitioned out of the lever machine era. And even though they use modern systems, they still have straight ticket voting. I believe New York is one of those.
And one last question on that same subject. What is your thoughts on having a straight ticket option?
Well, I'm not in favor of it because you have some good candidates, some bad candidates. And I think that the candidates ought to go out there and compete and express their positions and opinions about the issues that are concerning the voters, and may or may not be aligned with any particular party.
But that would still, not using the straight ticket option would be available.
Well, possibly. It depends on how that ballot is formed.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike, let's see. Do you have another question from the chat room?
Not yet. Oh,
Okay.
okay. Actually, Jim Hannon just asked a question recently. He said, why did Pinal County find so many new votes during the AG recount? I remember there was a kerfluffle about a couple of thousand votes in Pinal County that came in very late. Did you follow that at all, Benny?
I did, and I watched what happened prior to the election in Pima County. They had a significant turnover in personnel up there. The previous election director really messed up sending out ballots, sent ballots out to the wrong person or the wrong people, and they had some city election questions that weren't on city voter ballots, those kind of things. So they fired the elections director. They moved the recorder into the elections director position. She was already intending to retire. And then they moved one of the assistant county attorneys into the recorder position that has responsibility for early voting. So there was a lot of shuffling of people going on in the election administration there. I watched the video of ballot counting and ballot, all the election administration that I can. And it seemed to me in Pinal County's case, that it was a fairly disorganized process. People would come in and out of the ballot room and leave ballots laying on the table, or they'd kind of run into a problem and somebody else would come in and they'd do something with the machine. So I just got the impression that the overall activity in Pinal County was lacked a lot of oversight and probably didn't have anybody in there that had a lot of experience doing what they needed to do.
Okay, Rod Norris, you have a question.
Yes, I'm wondering if during the litigation that Carrie Lake is imposing on the legal system here, if she or the courts are using your data.
Well, she would not be using my data, I can assure you.
No.
I have put that out. I've sent it to Maricopa County. I'm hopeful that the attorneys have looked at it. I've tried to do everything I can in the media with the Arizona Republic and Newsweek and other places to say that there are records available in the public record domain that you can figure out what happened in the election. You don't need to generate all these various myths and conspiracies and then go to court without any substantial evidence to show. I'm hoping that eventually the judges will take notice of that, start asking the right questions of the lawyers and dismissing the cases with summary judgments when they come in and they don't have anything to prove their case.
Thanks.
Oh, okay, Steve Early, you have a question.
This might be a little bit different than we were talking about, but being a number cruncher that you are, what is your opinion of ranked choice voting?
Well, I've not been impressed with the results where it has been utilized. It seems to me that it depresses voter turnout. It's very confusing to voters. Voters don't make their life endeavor dealing with elections. They're out raising their kids or going to work or trying to get on with their daily activities. And so ranked choice voting is fairly complicated in my mind. I know my wife keeps asking me about it. I keep trying to explain it to her and she keeps telling me I don't get it. So, you know, what we saw in Alaska last time, people typically gravitate toward one candidate that they really like, that they really support. They will mark that one vote in there. And then in ranked choice voting, if there is a sorting process that goes on, their votes get dropped out of the process if that candidate didn't get 50% right off the bat. So, you know, I guess there's some pros and cons about it. People want to argue that we get better candidates and better results by using that. We get I guess the consensus candidate rather than the one that had the most votes. I'm not personally in favor of it. I just think it's too complicated. People don't understand it. And I always had a question about, well, how do we audit that after the fact to go back and figure out, how did you do that sorting? Did you do it properly? Can you document what you actually did? So those are general comments that I have about it. That's my personal opinion though.
My opinion is that one of the reasons why their GOP is currently so hostile to ranked choice voting is because it does tend to turn down the temperature on rhetoric and extreme candidates, more centrally viewing, more central candidates who are actually addressing more of the electorate and not going negative so much tend to do better in ranked choice voting. And obviously that would break the stranglehold of the MAGA faction over the GOP. So they hate it. Do you have a opinion on that at all?
Well, no, that's a little further into politics than I really wanted to go with this discussion.
That's cool.
I'll defer on that one.
Okay, I got a couple questions in the chat that you could answer. We got a question as to whether you know the number of federal only ballots that were cast in Maricopa County. That would be people who, for some reason, don't qualify to cast a state
Yeah,
ballot, but only federal.
I actually do know that number. There were 2,722. 2,158 of them were cast early. There were 395 at the polling place, and there were 169 that were cast as provisional ballots. So 2722 is the total number.
Cool. If the person who asked that question would like a follow-up, drop it in the chat. Next, we had a question of what you think ought to happen to the Cochise County supervisors who refused for so long to certify the election and delayed the certification there.
Well, I was on the other side of that argument down there. The whole idea of hand counting ballots, for some reason, seems to me to be promoted by people that have not actually ever hand counted ballots.
Yeah.
I tell the story. I represented the Republican Lawyers Association in Wisconsin when they did the recount of the presidential election. And I was in Winnebago County. We had 60 people that worked for 10 days counting ballots up there, and we broke them up. We had tables of 10 to deal with the ballots. Typically, there were about 3,000 ballots per table. I've watched 10 people try to count the votes on 3,000 ballots for one race, president's race, take 8 hours
Mm.
to come to an agreement about how those votes are counted. So when you start dealing with multiple million ballots and getting an accurate count, that's just ridiculous. And there's no way to audit it. You would have to go back and do another hand count. The outset test should be, can you prove that the machines were incorrect? If you can't, we're going to accept the machine count. So what should happen to the supervisors in Cochise County? I think that's up to the voters in Cochise County.
I have a question, I think. I guess my question is more prospective than respective or retrospective. And that's, are you following any of the so-called election integrity bills that are passing through our state legislature now? And do you see anything that is actually well-intentioned and useful to improving our election system pending?
On the first question, yes, but just peripherally, as they're brought to my attention, I comment about them to people. It seems to me that most, if not all of them, are reactive to problems that don't actually exist. And I don't see anything so far that it would be actually useful, other than possibly the suggestion that we put some kind of a deadline on mail ballots getting back in. If you want to vote early, then I think you should vote early. Get it back in by Friday. And if you can't get it back in by Friday, go to the polls, either emergency voting on the weekends or on Monday, or go to the polls on Tuesday and cast your ballot. This idea that we're going to drop off 300,000 or 400,000 ballots on election day and then expect results at 10 o'clock at night is just nonsensical. Vote early, we can get the ballots processed. We can make sure that all the voters are verified. We can get an accurate count and take away some of this distrust about, well, you didn't announce results immediately after the close of the election, so you must be doing something behind the closed doors. No, we're just verifying voters and trying to get the ballots run through the machines.
Well, I know you don't want to talk about politics too much as opposed to just the results of the election, but I mean, I am curious as to what immunized you to the leadership of your own party at the time making these claims, and is there anything that we can do to help other conservatives draw those same conclusions?
Well, I spent 8 years as a Marine in combat. Might have had something to do with that. I've been shot at and missed a lot of times. And I think it's important to get this right. I don't have a political axe to grind, but I know that our elections are important and people have to trust the results when they're announced, and then get behind the people that got elected to office. Let them govern. If we don't like the way they govern, then we'll throw them out of office the next time. That's why we have periodic elections.
Okay, Craig Markin, you have a question.
Yeah, do you have any opinion on what would happen to the turnout if the voting day was a holiday or on a day where people aren't working?
Well, it would probably increase. We got a little bit of an issue with the federal setting of the date of the federal election on the first Tuesday after the first Monday or something like that, some words to that effect. So that sets that day. I think that if we could vote on the weekend, that'd probably let a lot of people that have normal work routines during the week get out and vote. We supplant a lot of that with the early voting process we have here in Arizona. We give people 29 days to do a mail ballot or go to one of the early voting sites or emergency voting on the weekend. So there's a lot of opportunities for people to vote. I don't know incrementally how much it would change to do voting over several days rather than one day. I know it would be a problem getting election volunteers to man the election places. And then we're going to have to do something about the security of the ballots and the equipment and stuff. We'd wind up having sheriff's deputies or somebody watch all the polling places for however long we're going to have this extended voting period. Because we don't want to let the results out early and let people know where they need to put their dollars or their advertising or whatever. Make your campaign and then leave it up to the voters.
Okay, Vivian Hardy, you have a question.
So I did want to mention that there are some states that have only mail-in ballots. And what they found is that the percentage of people voting does increase when they have only voting mail-in ballots. What are your opinions about that, Benny?
Well, I'd be in favor of it, really. I have been around long enough to see a lot of hanky-panky going on in the polling places on election day, with people not, being told that, well, your party doesn't have any rights to vote here, or we don't have any of your party ballots here, or I know all these people, there's no reason for them to vote provisional ballots. All that kind of stuff happens in polling places on election day, and we don't have enough volunteers to go around and catch all of it. But on mail ballots, I can check on a daily basis as the ballots come in and the reports come in. I can see that the ballots that are being counted are from qualified electors, that there's no abnormalities about different things happening with excessive turnout or lost ballots, those kind of things. And after the election, I would know right away what the results were, because we would have processed all those ballots. So I would certainly be in favor of it. I think Oregon and Washington are two of the states that are all mail at this point, and they seem to be satisfied with it. And it seems to me that it allows everybody an opportunity to vote one man or another. There is a problem for some people with mail ballots. They don't have good outgoing mail capability. And so there has to be a way to return that ballot other than the mail. But you can use drop boxes and take the ballots to the recorder, different things to accommodate that particular problem.
Clean elections and the funding. Seems like there's a correlation between the candidates that access the funding and they're losing the election. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. That's probably a little more political. I just have never been real impressed with clean elections. I think a part of generating support for your election is getting out and getting financial support from people. I was very unsuccessful of that in my race for recorder. Wound up spending about $20,000 of my own money to lose that election. But I think getting financial support is a big part of demonstrating to the voters that you do have support. You are talking about things that people are interested in. And clean elections candidates, we were promised early on that we would get better candidates and all of this problems would go away. And I just have not been impressed that that's the case. On the candidate side, though, it does free people up to do something other than going to donor dinners and eating the rubber chicken,
Yeah, I got a couple questions in chat. Yeah, and
Okay.
Benny, the pushback I'd make on that particular observation is that there are a lot of people out there who need representation who just don't have the money to financially support candidates. And I think something like democracy dollars, where you give each voter a certain amount of money to give to candidates of their choice, which is in fact funded by the state, might be a good way to increase representation of those people.
Well, for the Democratic Party, also the Act Blue platform, I think, has helped you tremendously. That people can send in $5, $10, whatever they might have available.
Yeah. Ellen Parrish has a question. The question is whether or not the number of election workers needed has scaled or changed with voting technology changes and population increases. She remembers when she was young that, elections are called on election night, everyone voted in person. And while she appreciates early ballots and extended polling hours, she wonders if that's making voting more accessible has slowed the process systemically.
Well, I think undoubtedly it has, because the early ballots have to be verified first by the recorder, and then they're passed off to the elections department, and the elections department has to take ballots out of envelopes and make sure that they're not turned or torn or wrinkled up so that they can't go through the machines. All of that takes a lot of time. And then eventually those ballots go over to be counted. But mail ballots probably add another 3 or 4 days
Yeah.
to the announcement of the results. But, you know, with 85% of the ballots being returned by mail in every election, it seems to me they're extremely popular.
Indeed.
And
Try
they get
and pry them from voters'
excellent.
fingers. Yeah.
Yeah, we have excellent voter turnout here. I want our government to be reflective of the will of the people. And if we can get 60-70% of the people saying what they want, you know, I accept it and move on.
Excellent point. I wonder also if you think that maybe the additional touch points that we have where we have to actually interact with the ballots and verify information also makes our elections more secure in a way than they used to be.
Well, they do if people will do some of the sorts of things that I do, checking it periodically as it is progressing, making sure that we don't have too much turnout in one precinct versus no turnout. We had several years ago, we had a situation where I was checking on a daily basis the ballots returned coming in back in, and there was a couple of zip codes that I wasn't getting any ballots back from. We tracked that down to the mail department or the post office through routing it through Marana, had not delivered the ballots. So we had an emergency printing of those ballots, got them out to the voter, and those people got a chance to vote. So, you know, I think that the mail ballot part of it is a better system than relying solely on going to the polls on election day.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes sense that if you have, you know, only one point of failure, if that fails, you catastrophically fail. Whereas if you have multiple points of failure, possibly that don't affect all the ballots, you know, you are more likely to have less problems in the long run.
Yeah, fortunately here we don't have tornadoes and hurricanes, but those parts of the country that do,
Exactly.
you can lose election day.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, do we have a last question from the chat room?
Yeah, Jim Hannon wonders, has Pima County always viewed the cast vote record as private, and why does Maricopa County see it differently? Apparently there's different interpretations of what a public record is in these places.
Well, up until this year, the Pima County cast vote record was public as well. We have a different elections director. She's made a different determination. And we don't have clarity in our state statutes or our procedures manual about the status of the cast vote record. I did have a conversation with one of the senators in our new legislature saying that if they didn't get anything else passed, I'd like to get some clarity on whether that cast vote record is public or not.
Okay, well, Benny, thanks so much for being here today. You had everyone's rapt attention. Really salute you for the good work that you're doing that benefits all of us, no matter what the party, Democratic, Republican, Green, or Libertarian. So we salute you for your work. Let's give Benny a big thank you.
Y'all,
Okay.
you're welcome. Thank you.